We're live. Okay, so today is Yom Haatzmaut, and I thought it very appropriate for us to go through a number of sources of, a machloket, a fundamental debate between Rambam, Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides, if moving to the land of Israel, living in Israel, is considered one of the Taryag, one of the 613 mitzvot, or not. And I extend my thanks to an old high school classmate of mine, Rabbi Kenny Brander, who put together a beautiful article and source sheet in the Yom Haatzmaut to Go periodical that Yeshiva University published. And we'll be using his sources. Yes, Janet?
What is Yom Haatzmaut?
Yom Haatzmaut. Haatzmaut means independence. Oh. So the 5th of Iyar, today is even though today actually is the 4th of Iyar, right, but it gets pushed back, right? But Yom Haatzmaut is the independence, Israel's Independence Day.
In the newspaper today, they printed out the whole State of Israel Declaration.
Yeah.
Is it 2 days or is it 1 day?
It's 1 day.
So what was yesterday then?
Yesterday was Memorial Day.
Yeah, Hazikaron.
Right, Yom HaZikaron for the soldier, for the personnel, soldiers, IDF, and those even before there was an IDF who fell in defense of the land of Israel during the time of the establishing of the state and after the establishment of the state. So those 2 days go consecutive. Yom HaZikaron goes right into Yom Haatzmaut.
But we're keeping it today because of Shmir Shabbos?
Correct. In other words, when it falls out, due to all the festivities on Yom Haatzmaut, so the chief rabbinate was concerned that if it would be celebrated on a Friday, when actually Hey Iyar, the 5th of Iyar falls out, then it would lead to Shabbat desecration. So they didn't want the celebration of Israel's Independence Day to lead to Shabbos desecration. So everything gets pushed back a day. So it's celebrated on Wednesday night and Thursday in Israel. Okay. So we know the Gemara discusses, we have this concept of Taryag mitzvot. Taryag is the numerical value of 613 mitzvot. So the Gemara Mako tells us there are 613 mitzvot. But how do we determine what makes the cut and what doesn't make the cut? So Rambam, Maimonides, when he lists his Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of the mitzvot, where he lists his tally of the 613 mitzvot, he does not include the mitzvah of settling the land of Israel as one of his 613 mitzvot. Ramban, Nachmanides, takes issue with that. And he writes, it's the first blue box, both Hebrew and English, mitzvah revi'it. He says the fourth mitzvah, again, omitted by the Rambam, by Maimonides, shenistavinu lareshet haaretz. We were commanded to take control, to conquer the land. Asher natan hakayid barach yitalel avotenu, that the God, may be blessed and uplifted, gave to our forefathers, LaAvraham, LiYitzchak, LiYaakov, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, v'lo ne'azva biyad zulateinu min omot, and we should not allow it to remain in the hands of other nations, o lishmama, and we should not allow it to remain desolate. Interesting, he uses that term. That's exactly Mark Twain, who traveled to the Holy Land in the mid to late 19th century, 1800s, spoke of the desolation there, right? And that's actually what the pasuk says, that God said it will remain desolate for you until you will return. So Ramban explains that there is a mitzvah. One of the Taryag is to settle the land of Israel. The source that he brings, we have over there, Ramban explains Bamidbar 33:53 as the source. The pasuk says, "V'horashtem et haaretz," you shall, right, the English says you shall clear out the land and settle in it. V'yishaftem ba. Ki lachem natati ta'aretz lareshet otah. To you I have given the land for you to inherit it. And Ramban, I don't have that copied for you, but Ramban in his explanation on the Chumash says, Al dati, my understanding is, Zo mitzvat asehi. This is a positive command, one of the 248, the 365 don'ts, 248 do's, giving us our 613. This is a mitzvah aseh. Yitzaveh otam sheyeshvu ba'aretz. We're commanded to settle in the land, the Yisroel to conquer it, kihi nitna lahem, because it's given to you. V'lo yimasu b'nachalat Hashem. Do not reject, do not despise this portion of God. V'al ya'alel datchem v'lechem v'lechosh eretz shinar. And don't say, hey, let's move to Uganda. He doesn't say that, but that's what it was. At Herzl. Oh, someone had. I'm sorry. Yes, someone had suggested that. Right. Let's go to Uganda. I think Idi Amin Dada could have been a wonderful friend and neighbor. Right. So therefore, don't think to go to conquer the land of Shinar or Eretz Ashur or the land of Ashur or anything else and settle there. If you do that, you're going against the mitzvah of Hashem that this is the land for us to conquer and settle. Umashif ligoroteno, and that our sages went to such a degree, speaking about the mitzvah of settling the land and the prohibition of leaving it, right? And if there's a couple and the husband wants to go to Israel and the wife doesn't, she's considered a moredet. She's like rebelling against the marriage, and that's grounds for divorce without a ketubah. If she wants to go to Israel and he doesn't, that's grounds for a divorce, and she gets the ketubah. Here's where we are commanded to do this mitzvah, this pasuk. So Ramban is very, very clear that we have a mitzvah aseh to settle this land. And he mentioned over there the idea of forcing a spouse to go, right? In a situation where one wants to go, the other doesn't. The one who wants to go to Israel can force the other to go. Right? That is the overriding opinion in that little domestic debate that might be going on. And the Gemara in Ketuvot, that's our second blue box. Tan Rabbana, we learned only Adam Eretz Yisrael. A person should always live in Israel, even in a city that's mostly idolaters, and not live outside of Israel, even in a city that's mostly Jewish. Whoever lives in Israel, it's as if they've got a God. And whoever lives outside of Israel, it's as if they don't have a God. Wow, well, let's see in a moment what this means. Shenem, as it says, to give to you the land of Canaan, liot lachem lelokim, to give you the land of Canaan, to be to you as a God. The Gemara asks, and anyone that lives outside of Israel in the diaspora has no God? To teach you, if you live in Chutz La'aretz, it's as if you are worshiping idolatry. You have a God, but it's tantamount to serving idolatry. We explained this actually yesterday between Mincha and Mariv, that whenever we're serving God through an intermediary, that has a tinge of idolatry, because that's how idolatry began. Who am I to serve the great God directly? But God created his servants, the sun, the moon, the oceans, the wind, the earth. Let me serve God through his agents, through his servants, and I'm thereby serving God. So too, when we're outside of Israel, our connection to God is layered. It's not as direct as it is in Israel, and therefore, it's tantamount to idolatry. Right? And that's what David complained to Shaul. Ki garshuni hayom, you've driven me out this day from the portion of God, telling me to go serve other gods. Did Shaul, or those who were chasing him at the behest of Shaul, tell David to go serve other gods? But as we said, if you live outside of Israel, it's as if you are serving idolatry. Yes, Ida.
So then the question is, according to the Rambam, who is a more authentic Jew? The observant Jew who lives in the diaspora, or the Apocorus who lives in Israel?
Okay, very interesting, right? According to Ramban, right? We'll see by the end that Rambam also agrees with this mitzvah, but it categorizes it differently. But that's a very interesting question. Who is a greater Jew, right? The Jew.
Not greater, or more authentic.
More authentic.
There's a difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that. I will tell you that when I, as a young man studying in yeshiva, a young married man, and very much wanting to go back to Israel, but not sure, at that time I had not yet been offered the position that I ended up taking and living there and teaching there for many years at a yeshiva, but I was having a discussion with Rav Yaakov Weinberg of blessed memory, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yisroel, and I asked him along those lines, I said, I have such a want to go back to Israel. Is it better to live in Israel and work at a falafel stand, right? Or is it better it's better to be in Israel working at a falafel, nothing wrong with falafel, I love falafel, but not involved in Jewish education, rabbanus, whatever it might be, or better to be a rabbi or Jewish educator outside of Israel? And his answer to me was, a person should be wherever they feel they can best serve Hashem. Okay? And there's no blanket answer. Right? Wherever a person feels that they are best serving Hashem, that is where they should be. Now, so Rambam leaves it out. Ramban very emphatically has it listed, and he brings sources of forcing a spouse to move to Israel, right? Where the Gemara speaks about outside of Israel, it's like no God, it's like idolatry. The Ramban is very, very emphatic. I'm sorry, Lana?
I said, why would someone not want to live there? Like if when
look, you're asking that question to a table full of people headed by a rabbi who are all living in Irvine, right? I'm sure we would hear about 20 different answers if we go around, but there are answers, right? And if we don't have answers, then we shouldn't be sitting here. Yes?
Regarding divorce, what if there's another mitzvah that makes the reason for the credible objection by the spouse? Say, like Kivud al and say there's elderly parents, they can't really travel, and so they want to be close to make sure that they can...
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's an interesting point you're bringing up, Janet. And perhaps, usually we say each case needs to be judged, right? But this is giving us the principles that would be applied, and then there are different individual and personal factors that do need to be applied.
If a spouse objected for that, then the rabbi could make a different...
Key word being could, right? All of that would go into the cheshbon, the calculation. Okay, so there are, of course, going to be commentators who come to the defense of the Rambam, explaining why the Rambam omitted this mitzvah, did not list the return and living in Israel as one of the Taryag mitzvot, and that is done by Rav Isaac de Leon in his commentary Megillat Esther, defends the Rambam for not codifying living in Israel as a mitzvah, and he articulates the following position. The mitzvah of living in Israel was not given for all generations. It is limited to those living before the exiles and those of us who will be living during the Messianic era. Why is this a reason to preclude it? The Rambam begins his Sefer HaMitzvot with 14 klalim, 14 parameters, 14 principles guiding which precepts are included in the list of the 613. As we mentioned, there are a lot more than 613s. How do you decide which ones? So you have to have a very, very clear organization of which types are, which types aren't. Now, the third postulate is to only include commandments binding for all generations. And being that the command to live in Israel is not binding for all generations, therefore, it would not be fitting, hi David, to include that as one of the commandments. Let's go through a little bit. The Megillat Esther brings a number of proofs to support the view that this is not a commandment for all generations. Meaning, who's to say it's not for all generations? Let's see. Number one, the Tosafot in Ketuvot writes that the Talmud's statement permitting the forcing of a spouse to move to Israel does not apply today. Today, meaning 12th century France. That's today, if we are the Tosafot speaking, because of the danger of traveling to Israel.
The Crusades.
Right? Tosafot continues with an additional reason, quoting Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen, that there is no longer a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael since we are unable to fulfill the mitzvot hatuluyot ba'aretz, the mitzvot that are tuluyot, that are dependent on the land, the agriculturally based commandments. Therefore, the Rambam cannot codify living in Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot, because again, principle number 3 is that is for all generations. And this is not for all generations. Right? Tosafot said those laws don't apply because of the danger. Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen says it's no longer a mitzvah because we can't fulfill all of the mitzvah depending on the land. Number 2, we have a teaching of Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said, Kol ha'olam mibavel Eretz Yisrael over ba'aseh. The Gemara that tells a story that someone was going to make aliyah, was moving from Bavel to Israel, from ancient Babylon to Israel. And he was avoiding Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because he knew Rabbi Yehuda was very much against it. Rabbi Yehuda would say, if you go from Bavel to Israel, you are violating a positive commandment, as it says, Bavela yuva'u, to Bavel you will come. This is the prophecy of Yirmiyahu. V'shama yiyu, and there you will be, ad yom pakdi otam num Hashem, until the day that I will remember them, says Hashem. So the Megillat Esther continues and says, if living in the land of Israel is a binding biblical commandment for all generations, how is it possible for the Navi, the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, to articulate a perspective contrary to the Torah? So that's another reason why the Rambam does not codify living in Israel as a commandment. According to this, according to Yehuda at least, clearly it was not a commandment at that time. It was even a prohibition or a going against a positive commandment.
Is it a commandment to live in Israel?
That's according to Ramban, it's one of the 613. According to Rambam, he doesn't list it as one of the 613. The next thing is the 3 oaths. And this you might have come across. You know, there is an organization called Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta literally means the defenders of the city. And they are a pretty extreme anti-Zionist group. And they base it on these 3 oaths. And they say that it's wrong. We'll soon see these oaths. But they say that it goes against the will of God. It goes against authentic Judaism to have returned to Israel at the time that we did. And therefore they get themselves Palestinian passports. I wonder just how long they would last in this Palestine, but that's another issue. Okay, the 3 oaths are again the Gemara in Ketuvot. The Gemara says as follows, we have it both in Hebrew and English. This is the bottom of page 2. Gimel Shavuot Halal Lama. What are these 3 oaths? Achat, one was Shelo Ya'alu Yisroel B'choma. Yisrael should not go up to the land of Israel B'choma, in force, in mass. Okay? We can't forcibly go back to the land of Israel. V'achat, and another one, that we will not rebel against the nations of the world. V'achat, and the third one, that God made the other nations swear, they should not overly persecute the Jewish people. Okay? So we'll soon see responses to this Megillat Esther, but he brings the Gimel Shavuot. He brings these 3 oaths. For this statement in Talmud, it would seem that conquering, returning to Israel en masse is forbidden. So how could it possibly be, Megillat Esther says, how could it be a mitzvah, a biblical commandment, to do that which we were sworn not to do?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How can we not rebel when they're rebelling against us?
Good, excellent point. And we're going to come to that. We're going to come to the excellent point, Ilana. Rav Isaac de Leon, the Megillat Esther, continues to the statements of Chazal describing the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. All those statements that we had about a spouse forcing, and you don't have a God, you're worshiping idolatry, that is talking about when the Beit HaMikdash is functional. Okay, so we have the Megillat Esther giving us quite a few points, an explanation of why the Rambam, Maimonides, omits the living in Israel, returning to Israel, as a mitzvah. First of all, it doesn't apply at all times. Tosafot mentioned when because of danger or because of not all the mitzvot being in play, the inability to fulfill the mitzvot. Therefore, the mitzvah doesn't apply at all times. So the Rambam will leave it out. And we have Yirmiyahu speaking about the prohibition, and Rabbi Yehuda using that as the source of the prohibition to go from Babel to Israel. And we have the 3 oaths. So of course, right, in any good debate, a good tennis, a ping pong game, okay, the ball is now back in the Ramban's court. What will Ramban do with these factors that were mentioned? So let's go to page 3. The use of the opinion in Tosafot of Rabbeinu Chaim, the use of Tosafot to suggest the reasoning for Rambam's omission of living in Israel can be challenged in a number of ways. Again, the Megillat Esther said, look, it's not at all, this is not a mitzvah that applies at all times. How do we see that? Tosafot says, because of danger, the forcing the spouse doesn't apply, right? It's not at all times. And Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen said that now that you can't fulfill, that you don't fulfill all the mitzvot that are dependent on the land, so therefore there's no mitzvah to go back. The Tshuvat Maharit explains, right, is no longer due to the danger of travel, not due to the inability to perform specific agricultural commandments. The Maharit continues. Rabbeinu Chaim's okay. So first of all, I cut this off a little bit. I apologize. Right? Let's say, if there would be a law stating Jews are not allowed to don their tefillin, right? And it becomes very dangerous for a Jew to don his tefillin in Irvine. Would we say that the mitzvah of tefillin doesn't apply?
Of course not.
Of course not. We say the mitzvah of tefillin applies, but we might not be able to fulfill it. We might only be able to do it in certain situations. So therefore, to say that because we can't travel to Israel because of the dangers, to say therefore the mitzvah is not for all times, that's not the case. What the Tosfot is saying is, normally, and this kind of comes back to the point that Janet brought up, normally, when everything else is on even keel, if one spouse wants to go, that's grounds to force the other one to go. When there are other factors that it's tremendously dangerous to travel, or tremendously dangerous to be there, then that is a factor. And therefore one spouse can't force the other spouse. Does that mean that it's not a mitzvah? Of course it is a mitzvah, but it might be a mitzvah that is not practical for us to fulfill. It might be dangerous for us to fulfill. So therefore, the first point of the fact that one spouse can't force the other spouse now because it's dangerous doesn't mean it's not a mitzvah. It means the other factors that can come into play are going to come into play, and we'll have to determine, can one spouse force the other? Now, and secondly, Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen's point, third paragraph now, about not being able to fulfill the mitzvah of Tluya Ba'aretz, that is strange. Right? If you buy land in Israel, you will take off Truma, that's the tithing, the 2% that goes to the Kohen. You will take off Maaser, that's the tithing of 10% that goes to the Levite. You will take off another 10% that goes either to the poor or is brought to Jerusalem, depending on the year of the Shemitah cycle that you are in. You will do all these things. You could leave Peah, the corn of the field, unharvested. You could leave Leket, that if you drop some gleanings, you don't go back to get them. You could leave Shikha, if you forgot a bundle, you don't go back to it. Right? So the mitzvot, Hatluya Ba'aretz, one still can fulfill it.
Can I ask a question? If, say, the couple ends up going to Israel and then war breaks out, and
that's
one
another
wants to
question
leave,
they'll need to ask.
and is that against God to leave?
That's a question that they need to discuss, probably discuss with the rabbi. That's something that they would need, these individual cases all need to be discussed. Yeah.
War breaks out.
Yeah. Finally, the fourth paragraph, even Rabbeinu Chaim's opinion is correct, it cannot be used to substantiate the position of the Rambam. For the Rambam argues on Tosafot and says that a man may force his wife to move to Israel and vice versa. So you can't use that as an explanation for the Rambam if the Rambam disagrees with Tosafot and says that a husband can force a wife, and this is all the same time period. So he doesn't say that that is a moot issue. So therefore, those who come to defend the Ramban, right, say that this explanation of the Rambam falls short. Second one, the middle of three now, the prohibition of moving from Bavel to Israel. The Rav Isaac de Leon, the Megillat Esther, claims that one observes from Yehuda's position in the Talmud that Yirmiyahu established a decree against moving Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, it must be that the mitzvah of living in Israel is not binding in all generations. Otherwise, how could a prophet, Yirmiyahu, who can't add or detract from the Torah, establish a decree impeding one from moving to Israel if that is a mitzvah of the Torah? In doing so, he is minimizing, detracting one of the laws of the Torah. So, in the Pa'at HaShulchan, written by one of the students of the Vilna Gaon, or Yisroel ben Shmuel Ashkenazi of Shklov, discusses the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. He points out that the conclusion of the Talmud does not support Rabbi Yehuda, since Rabbi Zeira, I believe he was the one I mentioned earlier, who was trying to avoid Rabbi Yehuda because he was planning to go to Israel, and many other Tanam and Amorim did move to Israel, even after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And the Rambam also does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, because the Rambam allows a spouse to force the other to move to Israel, regardless of where they are. So therefore, he's clearly not going with Rabbi Yehuda. If you go like Rabbi Yehuda, how could you force a spouse to do something that goes against the law? Right? Now, exactly what they would do with that pasuk from Yirmiyahu remains to be seen. Yes, Dov?
And they also say, I don't know if it works or not, because I know if a person by accident kills somebody outside Israel, are they still, can they go to Irvine? Can they flat to get away, and that would force his wife to go too?
Okay, I'm not sure. Let's go to the issue that is most discussed today. What I mean is that we have groups today of religious, Torah-observant, anti-Zionist Jews, and that is based predominantly on their take of these three oaths, which the first oath is that we do not go up there in force, and we do not rebel against the nation of Israel. Amongst the Hasidim, it is Satmar, and then to a very extreme degree, Neturei Karta.
What's the first word you said?
Satmar Hasidim is a sect of Hasidim, and they are against against the Israel enterprise. They're anti-Zionist, though, whereas Neturei Karta, you'll often see them demonstrating along with the Palestinians. Ciner will be there saying Tehillim along with the rest of Klal Yisrael when Israel's in a state of danger. Right? So they might have issues with the advisability of establishing a state, yet their allegiance is firmly with the Jews who do live there. Whereas the Neturei Karta, in my mind, has some very, very fuzzy and blurry lines.
They live in Israel?
I'm sorry?
Those people live in Israel?
There are some that do, but if they do, they sort of live off the grid in terms of the state. Yes, Janet?
So when, based on the oaths, when do these particular Jews think it will be okay to return?
Mashiach.
Only?
Only.
Okay.
So let's see the three
And
oaths.
the oaths, where did they come from?
The Gemara, it's a Torah Shebal Peh, that these are three oaths that God had us swear, or had us two we swore, and one the nation of the world swore, as those were the agreements as we went out into exile. Right? So, but you're raising a very important point, Lev. Right? As we'll soon see, it is Agadata. It's not a verse, it's not a pasuk, it's not a prophet. This is the Agadata. This is the stories, the teachings of the Talmud, right? And we'll soon see that, okay, so let's work on this a little bit. Perhaps the most central, the very bottom of page 3, the most central point of the argument of Megillat Esther is the three oaths related in the Talmud imposed by God. 2 of the oaths fall on the Jewish people and 1 on the nations of the world. There are a number of approaches defending the Ramban against these 3 oaths. Because if you have an oath not to do it, how can there be a mitzvah to do it? Rav Avram Bornstein of Suckerich writes in Avnei Nezer, we do not accept, this is what Lev was implying a moment ago, we do not accept these oaths as binding in halacha, since none of the codifiers of the Jewish law, there are many who codify Jewish law, who extract the Jewish law from the Talmud. And yet, none of the codifiers of Jewish law, including Rambam, codify these oaths in any context. In fact, the Rambam himself, at the end of his letter, Igeret Teiman, the letter that he wrote to Yemen, right, strengthening and guiding the Jewish community in Yemen, writes that the Talmudic discussion regarding these oaths is to be considered a parable and is not meant to be taken literally. Okay, so one approach of these oaths as being non-binding is it's not, none of the codifiers of halacha include it, and Rambam writes about it as meant to be a parable. It is a teaching, but it's not a literal oath. Now, the Maharsha explains he believes that the oaths are halachic in nature, but only binding when the nations of the world prohibit the Jewish people from conquering the land of Israel. But the Or Sameach of Meir Simcha Cohen of Devinsk, the Or Sameach writes that after the San Remo Conference of 1920, when Jewish sovereignty and settlement rights were recognized in Palestine by the nations of the world, and certainly in 1948, when the nations of the world voted in the United Nations, the splitting of the mandate in Palestine, with the British leaving and establishing 2 separate entities there. So therefore, the mitzvah of settling the land of Israel once again became obligatory. So he says, even if you're going to view these oaths as halachic in nature, then that's only when the nations of the world are prohibiting it. But once the nations of the world sanction it, then on the contrary, now we have that imperative that mitzvah to go ahead and settle the land and equal to all the other commandments. So that is two approaches. A third approach, Rabbi Brander writes, Rav David Libor of Yeshiva Shalvim suggested to me another approach based on a ruling in Shulchan Aruch. Two people shenishbu laso davar echad. Two people made an oath to do a certain thing. Va'avar echad mehem al hashvua, and one of them violated it. Hasheni patur ve'ein tzarach hatara. So the question is, does the other person need to go have his oath annulled? Or is it self-annulled? It was an agreement between the two of us. If you haven't done your part, then the whole agreement is moot. I don't need to go and formally sit in front of a Beit Din to annul my part. This was a pact. Once the pact is broken, it's broken. There's no longer any individual responsibility to maintain my part when you haven't maintained your part. Now, the Shach, in his commentary on Shulchan Aruch, the Nekuda Kesef, quotes Talmudic and Medrashic sources indicated this law applies even when oaths are between Jews and Gentiles. So that's the laws, Hilchot, Shavuot. Those are the laws of oaths. Therefore, since the nations of the world, remember there were two oaths on us and one on them. What was the one on them? They should not overly persecute us. Since the nations of the world violated their oath of not persecuting the Jews more than, of not overly persecuting, as is evident, crusades, inquisitions, pogroms, Holocaust, if they haven't kept to theirs, then this whole agreement of sorts is moot. The Jewish people are also exempt from fulfilling their oaths, and therefore these oaths have no halachic significance. Okay, so that is how Ramban could deal with these oaths and with these other points that were brought up in defense of the Rambam. So now let's move on to the next stage. So we understand the Ramban, but how about the Rambam? Okay, while the Rambam, this is the third to last paragraph on page 4, while the Rambam, Maimonides, does not count the mitzvah of settling the land of Israel formally amongst his 613, it is difficult to suggest that he does not consider it to be a biblical imperative. Meaning, how can the Rambam codify laws such as allowing a spouse to compel the other to move to Israel and stating it's better to live in Israel in a city full of idolaters than to live outside of Israel in a city full of Jews? He also codifies leaving Israel as like worshiping idols, forbidding one to depart from Israel, unless it's to learn Torah or to marry or escape persecution. You brought up the war issue, Ilana. The Rambam says it's prohibited unless it is to marry, to study Torah, or to escape persecution. So how could he have all of these laws in the books, in his book, if living in the land is not a mitzvah? Right? These are all almost derivatives, results of this mitzvah of living in Israel. So why then does he exclude it? Okay, he clearly holds of this mitzvah of being in Israel, evidenced by his having laws of spouse compelling the other to move, right, forbidding one to leave. So why doesn't he include it? So the Megillat Esther gave us a reason. What was his reason why he doesn't include it? Because it's not for all generations, but we showed that even according to Rambam, it seems that it is for all generations. Because he disagreed with those Tosafot that spoke about not being able to compel the spouse, etc., etc. So we're going to have two different approaches as to why the Rambam left it out. And we'll see it would seem it's not because he doesn't hold it's a mitzvah, but once again, as we mentioned before, there is a parameter of all times. There are certain parameters the Rambam uses, because we have a lot more than 613. So how do you pick and choose? You have to decide what are your parameters and stay within those parameters and come to a tally of 613. So let's hear. Once again, the Avnei Nezer, second to last paragraph on page 4, suggests the reason for the difference between the Rambam and Ramban is based on different paradigms on how they codify the 613. What are the parameters? According to Rambam, when there are two commandments and one is what enables the other, only the enabler is listed as one of the Taryag, not that which is enabled. So if A enables B, A will be listed, B will not be listed. As an example, page 5, in regard to the commandment of building the temple, with the purpose of the temple to create a physical space to house the Aron, because the Aron, the ark, is the vessel for which the presence of God emanates. The Rambam only lists the construction of the temple as a positive commandment. One second, the Torah says, "V'asuli mikdash," make for me a mikdash. It also says, "V'asu Aron atzei shitim." You should make an ark from this shitim wood. So why does the Rambam list the Mishkan, the building of the temple, but not the building of the Aron? Well, for the entire purpose of the temple is to create a location for the Aron, then the only commandment that is the conduit enabling the function of the other is the only commandment that is the conduit enabling the other, only that one, only the A which enables B, only A is listed as a 613. Okay? So again, that's why does the Rambam list building the Mishkan and not building the Aron? Since building the Mishkan is what enables the building of the Aron. It's A that enables B. Therefore, the Rambam only lists A, building the Mishkan, and not that which is enabled by it, not B. Similarly, the Avnei Nezer suggests that when it comes to the commandment dealing with living in the land of Israel, the Rambam only lists the commandment that enables that. What enables us to settle in Israel? Conquering the land of Israel. Commandment 187. That's what the Rambam lists as one of his 613. That which results from that, once it's conquered, once you built the Mishkan, now you can build the Aron. Once you conquered the land, now you can settle the land. He lists the A and not the B. In other words, so it's not because he doesn't hold it as a mitzvah. We see there are all these resultant mitzvot that he does list. So he clearly holds that it is a mitzvah, but based on his paradigm of how you list the 613, he leaves it out. On the other hand, the Ramban's formulation, the Ramban's parameters, is that when there are two commandments which are of substance, even if one enables the other, both are to be counted. Therefore, the Rambam mandates that both the building of the temple and the building of the ark are to be counted as two separate mitzvot of the 613. If A enables B, you list both A and B. The Ramban counts building the Mishkan and building the ark. The Ramban counts conquering the land and settling the land. So when dealing with commandments of the land of Israel, Ramban does not just list conquering, but also settling and living as a separate biblical commandment. Yes, my friend Dove.
The second base of Mikdash didn't have Aron. Why didn't he make a new one?
We don't make a new one, and we weren't. It was on a lesser level. It was hidden away. It was hidden away. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Yes.
It seems like there's some difference because conquering the land of Israel is a commandment rather to the people, not to an individual one. If you treat it as an individual one, then it means exactly to move to Israel, because you can't conquer on individual level. But if you treat it as a commandment to
So you're saying the conquering is more of a national
it's a
level.
national level, then
National.
does it follow from there that you
Interesting.
individually...
You're raising an insightful differentiation here, but nevertheless, I think the 613, according to both of them, includes both national and also individual. So I don't know if that would be a reason to explain as to why one left it out or one included it. Right? But that is an interesting difference that you're pointing out.
It sounds like in codification, some poskim may have ended up with more than 613.
So that was the challenge. Again, there are a lot more than 613, right? So the challenge is to define the parameters and come out with 613. The Ramban, who's going to, when A enables B, is counting both A and B, will have to therefore leave out some others that the Rambam would include.
Where is it written?
And he'll say that those are part of a group that's included in this, or right, whatever his parameters are, that will explain why A and B of the enabler and enablee are included, yet he left out